Hello, my name is Gabriela Gheorghe and I work as a cybersecurity specialist at the Luxembourg House of Cybersecurity, an agency aiming to develop innovation, collaboration and competencies in cybersecurity for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as for the public sector in Luxembourg.
Thanks. I'm Jean Crenon. I'm a project officer at ILNAS in the Digital Trust Department. And ILNAS is both the national standards body for Luxembourg and also the recently appointed National Cybersecurity Certification Authority for the country.
Hello, I'm Natalia Vinogradova. I work at ANEC GIE, and we work together with ILNAS and support them in their mission as a national standards body.
In this video, we will tell you more about the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework, the European Cybersecurity Act, as well as about our EU-funded project named CORAL, aiming to help small and medium-sized organizations assess their cybersecurity posture with a view to obtain a basic level security certification in the context of the Cybersecurity Act. Knowing about cybersecurity certification opportunities can be interesting for different types of audiences. On the one hand, for the consumers, it would be interesting to know whether a product or a service can offer security assurance. On the other hand, for producers or providers of ICT services, products or processes, it could be interesting to know how difficult it is to obtain a cybersecurity certification in order to obtain eventually a competitive advantage. As for auditors, it could also be interesting to know about existing schemes that they might be required to audit against.
So in this video, what we're going to do is first show you a little bit what the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework actually is, how it's encoded by the Cybersecurity Act. We're also going to show you a little bit what gap the CORAL methodology and tool is trying to fill. After that, we're going to show you a little bit which standards or technical specifications the CORAL methodology and tool are using to try to address this gap. And finally, Gabriela will show us a little bit how the methodology works and take us through a sort of demo tour of the tool itself. So we hope you enjoy the rest of the video. Okay, so before we can tell you about what CORAL is, we need to give you a bit of context on the European Union Cybersecurity Certification Framework. So what this is an EU-wide framework that was put into place through a European regulation called the Cybersecurity Act, which fully came into force in 2021. In this framework, ENISA, which is the European Union Cybersecurity Agency, prepares certification schemes on specific topics, either in the ICT product domain or ICT service domain or ICT process domain. And these schemes encode everything from the security requirements on the targets themselves, through the security requirements on the conformity assessment bodies that provide the certificates, and all the way to the conformity evaluation methodologies themselves, depending on the kind of certification you're looking for. So it's quite complete. The major features of the regulation include things like, for instance, the applicability of certificates. A certificate obtained in any member state is valid across the entire union. Therefore, you have a reduction of market fragmentation and a uniformization, in a sense, of how certification should be applied all over the union. There are different levels of assurance built into the regulation, corresponding to different levels of risk. So a basic level of assurance gives you basic security requirements for low risk or standard risk scenarios. A substantial level of assurance is for, let's say, business grade scenarios against more sophisticated attackers. And high risk is really for anything that is much more in need of security than that. So for high-risk attackers, lots of resources, anything that's really high risk. Certification will by default remain voluntary unless it's specified by union law or member state law that a particular class of product or process or service requires a certificate. What the Act is meant to do is, first and foremost, increase the cybersecurity maturity level of the union itself through an uptake of this certification framework. But the CSA certificates are also foreseen to, for instance, support other union legislation, for instance, all those cybersecurity portions that you might find in the Cyber Resilience Act that's coming, or the Artificial Intelligence Act that's also upcoming, and so on and so forth. Draft schemes do exist in the context of the CSA. One of them is the EUCC that covers general ICT products, that's levels substantial and high. And another one is the EUCS, covering cloud services in general at all three assurance levels, so basic, substantial, and high. I invite you to discover these schemes by going to find their publicly available versions on the ENISA website. Finally, it's worth noting that ILNAS is, in the context of the CSA, Luxembourg's national cybersecurity certification authority in charge of supervision of missions. So now we can get into what CORAL is. CORAL, as stated before, is a European project with 3 partners: the Luxembourg House of Cybersecurity, which is the leader of the project, ILNAS, and the ANEC GIE. And it is in response to a call for projects that is meant to really support in implementing the Cybersecurity Act, which CORAL really aims to do. So the CORAL website will give you more information on the project in case you want to learn more about it after seeing this video. So what does CORAL want to be? What does it aim to be? What we noticed in the project is that the Cybersecurity Act is quite, in a sense, theoretical in how it looks. The schemes are quite heavy, and we're looking for a way to try to make this abstraction more concrete for the market. So to really bridge the gap between the CSA as it exists as a regulation and how it should be applied, especially for market actors that have less resources to devote to, for instance, cybersecurity. And to bridge this gap, we're going to do so already at the most fundamental level of security, so the basic level of assurance. The way CORAL proposes to do this is to put together a methodology and tools supporting this methodology to sort of streamline CSA or Cybersecurity Act certification procedures in order to reach a certification at level basic. And it's really targeted at SMEs in order to really lower the costs and simplify the process. The steps of the methodology are essentially first going through a set of standards-based questionnaires. So these are security questionnaires that are inspired by various standards. At the end of a questionnaire, one will be assigned a maturity score and a list of recommendations to put into place for those questions that have not been adequately answered, or let's say, answered to the best way possible. And finally, at the end of the tool, depending on how the maturity score is, depending on the grade that was received, one is proposed to either pursue possibly with a cybersecurity certification audit, or perhaps is invited to put into place recommendations. Finally, as a kind of addition, there is the proposal of an auditor profile for those auditors who would be interested in getting into certification through the CORAL questionnaires.
As mentioned by Jean, the objective of CORAL is to provide the questionnaire, the tool, for the organizations to assess their cybersecurity readiness for the low-risk applications. So, where does this requirement come from? We have found out that we can take the recommendations from European Cybersecurity Organization, a publication that provides already a set of a repository of standards and requirements from well-known and acknowledged standards development organizations, and adapt them so that it responds to the objectives of CORAL. So what we have considered that generic recommendations and requirements for ICT products, services, and processes may not be sufficient in the scope of CORAL, and we decided to extend that and consider also the specificities of IoT products, AI, and web applications. So what we have done, we considered more than 30 standards, and we have extracted the most relevant recommendations and requirements. So what we have found out is that we can base ourselves for the products, for the generic ICT products, on the standard series ISO IEC 15408 evaluation criteria for IT security. This is a series coming from international standard development organizations, ISO and IEC, and it provides a common set of requirements and recommendations for the security functionality of IT products and for assurance measures applied to these IT products, and also in the process evaluation of security. We found out that this generic series is not sufficiently addressing the web application security, and we turned ourselves to the recommendations from OWASP, a consortia that has developed an application security verification standard. And in this standard, we find the framework for the developing of controls and requirements for functional and non-functional measures to be implemented for the design, development, and testing of modern web applications and services. So this is a complement that is useful for the development of products questionnaire in the frame of Coral. For the services, ICT services, we have found out that the European Cybersecurity Certification Scheme, the draft provided for the cloud services, is very useful and aligned to the best to the future certification scheme, and it also actually covers the basic level. So we have taken this document and extended it so that different types of ICT services would be addressed. Finally, for the processes, we have based ourselves on a standard ISO IEC 21827, which is an international standard again, and it is a standard that provides a process reference model for the requirements upon implementing the security in a system or in a series of systems in the ICT security domain. Actually, if you want to know more about the analysis that we have made in the frame of Coral, you can have a look at this QR code and discover the deliverable. We have seen that a few standards that we have identified, they come from international standards development organizations, ISO and IEC. Actually, these standards, they are also adopted at the European and national level. And if you want to know more, ILNAS is your entry point for these European and international standards. And this ILNAS as a national standards body is actually your contact point for different organizations, standard development organizations. But we have also seen that sometimes standards can come from consortia such as OWASP or other guideline development bodies such as ENISA. I would like just to make a focus on international standards. That is a really huge body of knowledge provided to users and to the different organizations. If you want to know more about different cybersecurity standards, you can go through ILNAS and address and participate and contribute to different standards development working groups and committees, technical standards committees, at international and at European level. And you can do it absolutely free of charge. And we will be glad to have you on board. Now that we have discovered what are the basics of Coral tool, of Coral questionnaire, you will learn more on actually how it was constructed based on this standards repository, and you will see also a demo of the tool.
By now you would have seen already that you'd have guessed that the questionnaires are the basic building block of our Coral project and of the tool and of the approach, but they're not the only building block in that sense. We also propose in the project an approach to score different answers to questions, especially the partial answers, so that in the end a final score can be computed based on each questionnaire to be able to quantify the maturity of the security product, of the process or of the service that is being the target of the study. In addition to the scoring approach, there are also a set of recommendations that are suggested and that could also be a building block of the Coral project. The recommendations are useful to implement whenever the answer that was chosen by the respondent is considered not optimal. A report is presented in the end once the final score is presented, so that the set of recommendations in the report can be further used, presented to the management. In addition to that, we also propose the audit process as a building block, in the sense that CORAL can complement, or is an approach that can complement a normal conformity assessment, a generic conformity assessment process, in the sense that there would be places in which the CORAL methodology and the CORAL tool can be used to further improve transparency and, in the end, ultimately, the relation between the auditee and the auditor. And this we can see here, how it all fits together. On the left-hand side, we have a generic conformity assessment process with very generic steps that would start from an assessment process starting point, then going through the step in which the auditee would need to gather evidence supporting the requirements that are being set by the scheme chosen for the target. Then the auditor would need to organize audit meetings and review the evidence that is provided by the auditee. And finally, the audit result will be reached and communicated to the auditee. The CORAL process complements a generic conformity assessment process, in the sense that the tool and its questionnaire and scoring approach and so on could be used in the beginning, before the audit starts, in the sense that a future auditee can assess its maturity, the maturity of the service, process, or product that is being the target of certification, potentially, using the CORAL approach. And it is limitless, the number of times that the tool and the approach can be used. The idea being that by implementing recommendations that are suggested by the tool, maturity would increase. Whenever they decide to that the maturity is high enough to go for a certification, then the process can start. The auditee can gather evidence supporting requirements using the CORAL approach, in the sense that by using the questionnaires, different kinds of evidence can be mapped to the different questions in the questionnaire, knowing that the questions follow criteria that are, in principle, official or should be official. And based on that, the next step would be that the auditor will organize audit meetings and review the evidence and use, in this sense, the tool, CORAL tool, as support, because the tool itself allows for communicating the status of where the audit is, at which step or at which point in the audit process of particular criteria the auditor has ongoing decisions to make. And finally, the audit result is reached, and also the tool can support there to communicate the final result to the auditee. This slide is also showing the similar workflow. It's just that there are some extra details. For example, in the flow of CORAL, normally whenever the provider has an ICT product, process, or service for which it wants a basic certification, or also potentially a declaration of an EU declaration of conformity, the provider would use the tool that is called Fit for CSA, fill out any questionnaire that is applicable for whatever the target of certification is wanted. The score that will be provided by the tool can be maximum 100, and for non-optimal answers, recommendations could be proposed. The choice in the project was to cap the score at 85% or 85, and that is considered the threshold above which the provider could consider to launch a certification audit process or to issue a declaration of conformity. Otherwise, they would need to improve following the report and the set of recommendations suggested. Overall, the idea is to increase transparency between auditee and auditor, and to make it immediately clear what are the points that are being assessed at which point in the audit process. So this is where the tool Fit for CSA would help. One other point about how does Coral fit into the Cybersecurity Act context. As it was mentioned before by my colleagues, the CSA schemes for now, in particular EUCS and EUCC, are not yet activated at EU level. Once they are, they would already come with their requirements. They would come very likely with formats of how the declaration of conformity would look like, and potentially with a visual identity that would be the same across EU member states. And that could be seamlessly introduced into Coral, and this is the power of the tool itself. For now, while we're waiting that the schemes already proposed by ENISA are activated, the tool can be used to improve and measure the security posture of any market actor, because the questionnaires in the tool are enough flexible enough to be aligned with future schemes. So the tool offers a baseline and a way to align with well-established best practices. Now that we've seen the context of the project and the Coral approach, why not take a look at a demo?
If you go to fit4csa.nc3.lu, that's where you can find the proof of concept behind the Coral methodology. It's called Fit4CSA, and any owner of an ICT solution, either a service, a process, or a product, can use it freely and anonymously to assess the cybersecurity posture of their solution. When the cybersecurity score is considered good enough, Fit4CSA supports the audit process towards the cybersecurity certification at level basic in line with the Cybersecurity Act. And it comes in handy for both solution owners and auditors. Let's see how the tool looks like. So let's say you have a solution, be it an ICT service that you're offering to the outside world, an internal process, a physical product, or even a web application, and you would want to quantify or assess the cybersecurity maturity of that solution. If you're using the Fit4CSA tool, you're going to go through a different type of questionnaire in each of these cases, covering requirements that are taken either from applicable standards or existing good practices like those of OWASP, or from candidate schemes at EU level on cybersecurity certification. For this demo, I'll show you two outputs of the web application questionnaire based on two pre-filled questionnaires that I've done already for you. So the web application questionnaire looks like this. It has a number of questions, in this case 48, could be either single or multiple choice, with a score from either 0, partial, or full. And you need to pick what fits best relative to your context. You also have a continue later button that could come in handy in case you don't know the answer to a question, you need to check and you need time to do that, and you need to pick up where you left off sometime later. So you could either save the link or the token that is presented to you in that case. So for this demo, as mentioned before, I pre-filled already two questionnaires to show you the difference. And if you go to the main page and continue a previous survey, you would need to insert here the token from a survey that in this case is already finished, and I will just confirm, and this is what I get as output from the tool. I have an overview of my score, which in this case is 81% maturity for my web app, or its security maturity, and I have a visual overview over how well my questions have scored in terms of requirements, chapters or sections, as you will, and a set of recommendations that I could later use or follow to improve the standing of my web app. The report could come in handy if I would want to show this output at this point in time to my management or to my team. What happens if my score is better? The difference would be that if my score is over 85%, everything would be the same except the additional login button. And this button is an open door towards an audit module. And this module in Fit4CSA is supporting the audit process towards cybersecurity certification should I, as a solution owner, in this case a web app owner, would like to apply for one. So if at this point the company owning the product in question is willing to apply for certification at level basic in line with the CSA, then they would need to create an account within Fit for CSA and log in. And once they do, they would be able to access the audit module within Fit for CSA. This module gives a global overview over ongoing audits of that company's solutions, in this case, 2 ICT products and an ICT process, whereby the company has already performed a self-assessment with a good enough score. And the company has already chosen an auditor of their choice. This choice can be performed starting from a list of CSA level basic auditors that could be maintained within the tool by a conformity assessment body, for example. But anyhow, the association or the agreement between the auditee and the auditor would be done offline and not exactly in the tool. The result would, however, be visible in the tool because the auditee could indicate directly which is their auditor of their choice. And the second feature that is interesting here is that the auditee could have a view over the compliance status of their product or solution in any case. They could see the accepted, refused, or ongoing points that could, in all cases, be relative to the questions that exist in the questionnaires and have been answered in one way or another by the auditee. Of course, the auditee here is offline supposed to produce evidence and present that evidence to the auditor in order to support the selected answers. Having said all this, we think that Fit for CSA is an interesting tool that could decrease the costs and the complexity for performing audits with the view to obtain cybersecurity certifications at level basic within the CSA context.
Thank you very much for watching. We hope you found the content of this video interesting, and we have a few key takeaways that we would like you to get out of it. First of all, a better understanding of the European Cybersecurity Certification Framework, in particular the Cybersecurity Act.
You can contribute to future cybersecurity standards via ILNAS.
And that Coral is a useful tool to help assess the security maturity of your product, service, or process. For more information, you can visit the Coral website. You can get in touch with us. And please don't forget to take a look at the tool. Thank you for watching.